Moving on, let's talk about mechanics and theme. Elder, start us off. Tell us what we're talking about. Define your terms, sir.
Yeah, so had this thought coming into this episode about so when you play a game, I think generally in our Euro games, right, the kind of games that we like, the medium to heavy Euros, we talk a lot about the theme doesn't matter. I think a lot of these games kind of boil down to like interactive math puzzles, right, where you're kind of min-maxing.
Yep.
Being the most, whoever does the best at managing their resources, accomplishing things with the most economic of moves. Whoever does that the best in the puzzle will win the game. And a lot of times the theme doesn't matter, right? We talk a lot about the theme being pasted on. Right. It's just like, it might be a good game, but you wouldn't know, or you wouldn't have the feeling what the theme or the story of the theme is kind of telling you.
And sometimes that's that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Some of our favorite games in Game Brain are games that have a tacked on theme. Lorenzo, Il Magnifico.
Yeah.
Completely tacked on theme. Nothing in the game, nothing in the mechanics of the game says that this has anything to do with Lorenzo Il Magnifico at all. Right. It could have been any other theme and been fine, but it's such a good game. We absolutely love it.
Yeah. And again, I would say most medium to heavy Euros are in this case. I would probably say, if I had to wage a guess, like somewhere like 70, 80, 75, 80%. It doesn't really matter what the theme is or the theme is pasted on. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe. I do think that sometimes the theme is something that fits well within the game. It could be a totally different theme and still work, but I do think that there are a lot of games where a good theme pulls me into the game and makes me understand the rules of the game and the mechanics of the game in a intuitive way, as opposed to I have to memorize how this works way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another great point, right? Like in this marriage of themes and mechanics, because I know, again, I've played many a game with you, and you're an excellent teacher of games, of the rules. And I think given what you do and your love for story and crafting story, you explain games in a very like story driven way.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. Listen, I think you and I think we've taught each other probably a similar number of games over our lifetime. You've taught me tons and tons of games, and you come at it from a game design standpoint, where you're teaching how the clockwork works, which is also a really good way to do it. It's just we have very different styles of teaching, but I think they both come to the same result through different means.
Right. And I like to employ that tactic as well. Like I really enjoy, because I feel like, to your point, when you add story, or when you use the theme to kind of explain the story to a player that's learning the game, it just helps to remember it.
Oh yeah. Totally. And you do a very good job of that too.
Yeah. Well. So yeah, it's from a design point of view, again, I think when you sit down to design a game, we often talk about this idea of, well, what do you do first, right? Like when you come up with the concept of a game, do you come up with a theme and try to come up with mechanics that match the theme, or do you come up with the mechanics and then figure out a theme that goes with it? And there's definitely no right or wrong way to do it. I think you could be a designer that does it all, makes all your games one way or the other. I think you could mix it up. I don't think doing one or the other first is going to determine whether you ultimately make a good game or not. It's really like a kind of like a first step. I personally am a big fan of theme, although I love mechanics in a game. It would be very difficult, I think, for me to try to purely come up with the mechanics without thinking of the theme. It might be kind of like together, but I'm definitely more of a theme person first. Like, let me find a really cool theme that excites me, and then let me see if I can come up with some mechanics that match that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I have not designed a game other than a LARP, but in terms of designing a board game, whenever I've, as a thought exercise, said, oh, maybe I have an idea for a game, I tend to come very much from theme first. But when I do try to come from mechanic first, it's almost always, hey, this is a great mechanic that very, very few games have ever used. I would love to incorporate this in something, right? Or not exactly this, but a variation of this. And I have a little notebook that's just great mechanics that kind of got lost. Which is interesting, but most of the things that I think about, the way I come into a lot of games is through theme. That said, as I've said many times, I'm very much setting agnostic, right? I don't love the proliferation of fantasy themes. It does nothing for me. It doesn't tell me not to play the game. It doesn't necessarily throw me for a curve and make me not want to play a game, but it's just not really crucial to it. But that's probably more what you said first, which is about 75% of the games we play, theme really doesn't matter, and I think that's what I'm responding to. I think for me, I love games where theme does matter. That's my sweet. My two favorite games of all time are games in which theme matters tremendously. But I'm also able to play a game that just plays great, and it doesn't matter really what the theme is.
Yeah.
Weirdly, my favorite themes are weird. I like weird themes. All right, I don't need to ever play another game with dragons and elves. I don't. There's just so many of them out there. It's just boring to me. But science fiction too, I don't have to play a game with starships that much anymore.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. I'm looking for something different. So container, I love the theme of container. And to some people, they're like, wait, we're going to play a game about what? About loading containers on ships and sending them out and bringing them back? But it's just such a fresh design. It's such a different theme, and I absolutely love it. Demacher, the German parliamentary election system, as a game design, I love it. I love the obscure design, the obscure themes, and how faithfully they are done in good games. I'll even say games like what's the game, The Bloody Inn. Right, based on a real story of these murderous innkeepers that decided that it was better to roll their patrons for all the money they had and then bury them in shallow graves out in the woods. They made a good game out of that. I love that theme, probably more than I do most other things. Now the most common theme in board games is historic, and even if it's not technically historic, right? I mean, things like Agricola, et cetera, fit into that category, even though they're not really historic per se, right? Hansa Teutonica is technically historic, but not really, right? But that's the number one category. Then comes fantasy, then comes science fiction, and I tend to like the outliers. I don't know. What about you?
Well, I think you bring up a very good point about unique themes being fresh in a world where, again, I think most of the games that we like, these medium to heavy Euros, a lot of them are farming games, Agricola, or some format of that, right?
Yep.
Or these, historic, like basically Renaissance era, European Renaissance.
Yeah.
Some spin on that. Princes of Florence comes to mind.
Yeah.
We mentioned Lorenzo. Like how many boxes do we see of some Renaissance looking guy?
Yeah,
they're
with his
building
arms
games,
folded
or something. Yeah, generally they're
building a society, you're building a city, you're building a town,
Right.
You're building a castle. You're right.
Yep, exactly. So, and again, which lends itself to this whole idea of like being a complex, interactive math puzzle, essentially, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I think when there is a unique, and I'm just gonna mention some of the games on my list, like Galleris is my all-time favorite game, and I've never seen. I still remember the moment when I didn't really get who Lacerda was as a designer, but I remember reading the announcement for Galleris, and again, from somebody who studied fine art, has a degree in it, loves museums, finding out that there was going to be a board game about basically being an international art dealer seemed really exciting. And again, I can just look at a picture of a prototype or a game, and I guess part of what I'm doing is gauging how many resources seem to be in the pictures, and just be like, okay, that looks like my kind of game. That looks like an Elder game that I would enjoy playing. And I definitely felt that, and it was just so great to actually finally play it. And yeah, to this date, I mean, the game's been out there for a long time. It's still but just my favorite game. I think it's so. I recently got back into it, in the last several months, I got to play on TTS a couple of games of it, and it's just so good.
And when you think about it in those terms, there are so many games that haven't been made yet, right?
Yeah.
Pick the most boring generic thing you can think of, but once you see what it takes, right? There used to be that thing on CBS This Morning where they would have these filmmakers, these documentary filmmakers, go and they would shoot just this footage of how Twinkies are made, right? And you see all the steps in the process, and it's beautiful. It's kind of amazing and fascinating. That's game design, right? Games can be like that. Games can be, you are trying to do this. I could play a game about trash collection and be absolutely fascinated by it if you did it right. If you did it actually knowing where to put trash in a landfill, knowing how to separate out recyclables and all that sort of stuff is really hard. And how do you do that? How do you make that happen? I would be enthralled by designs like that. But I am not everybody.
Yeah. Well, I had the realization years ago that, and again, there's this idea of system design, right? That basically any business you can break down into a game. And I've started to, over the years incorporate that a little bit into my consulting practice. And, just also it loving games, it definitely helps me, conceptualize things and really, help out in conversations when people are trying to figure out a process or how to do something. I've been really interested in developing the video game industry in Africa, for instance.
Yeah.
Which is a huge undertaking, but it's just that there's so much opportunity. All of the developed world, including South America, has very developed video game industry.
You were a speaker at a conference in Ghana a couple of years back, weren't you?
Yeah. It was the first video game conference in Africa, and it was in Ghana. I got invited over, and I basically came out with a strategy. I shared a strategy for what it would take, because it is the last emerging market on the planet for video games, and it's going to happen. I mean, Africans love games. It's a very young continent. It's amazing. It's 50% of the population is under 30. There are some hungry developers there. And there's just some very interesting obstacles that are preventing the market from emerging. And I've often thought about designing basically bring video games or grow the video game industry in Africa board game, to kind of map out what all the different things and then run it like a simulation.
Because once you realize that, this is really hard, that becomes a game, right? The obstacles to doing something in real life become obstacles that you can gamify.
Exactly.
Which is really cool. I'm going to ignore the fact that you're ignoring the nearly absent Antarctic video game culture. Okay. I'm just saying there's one other market that has yet to be developed. Okay. But that's cool. So we've talked about games with amazing mechanics but a tacked-on theme. Games like Lorenzo El Magnifico. Let's talk about the other side of that. games that are heavily thematic, but the mechanics don't exactly support those themes. When I think of this side of the equation, I think of the PAX games. I think the PAX games are amazing, right? PAX Porfiriana being the first one is a game about the Mexican a period of Mexican history where the Mexican-American border was very much in flux, and who was in power was constantly shifting and constantly changing over a period of time. Actually, it was a period where it wasn't. There was the Pax Porfiriana. It was the Porfiriana regime in Mexico, but there was always the threat of it being toppled. Really fascinating, and the game teaches you a lot about history by looking at the cards and understanding how the game plays. But the mechanics of the game are, there are cards out there, and the cards represent certain things, and you're paying money to draft these cards and then play them in front of you. It's not what I would call a mechanics that really feed the theme in a way that really supports it. You're playing through history, but the game doesn't directly mimic history in a certain way. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're speaking to or pointing to is this idea of, part of mechanisms in a game is the actions that you take.
Yes.
Right. And so I think this speaks to the idea of like user experience, right? And it's like, what you're doing in the game space, does it feel like what the theme is expressing in the game?
Yes. Do I feel like I'm doing what the game is about?
Right. And it's always a level of abstraction.
Sure.
But again, does it again in terms of user experience, does it feel like that?
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah, I think that's fair. So for me, when you're talking about mechanics and theme, and a lot of the time is when I talk about it, I talk about simulation and game, right? And I think about it in those terms, like how well is it simulating something, an experience, which seems to me to be very thematic. It's very much about what is the theme of the game versus how well does the game play as a game. And it's really hard to do both well. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's almost always wow, that is so thematic. It's a good game, but not a great game. But the theme is, and I think of games like Here I Stand. I think a lot of war games and quasi war games can be in that realm where, wow, it really taught me so much about that period of history, but wasn't exactly the most engrossing game. It's good, but it's not incredible. Which is interesting. Should we get to our tops? What do you want to do?
Yeah. Just one more thing I wanted to say is
Please.
that sometimes there's this feeling of the mechanics are matching the theme. Like you're feeling like what the theme is, like what you're doing is matching up well.
Yeah.
But it's just not fun. Right. Or it's not
true.
enjoyable. Or we've, I think over the last year or two, each one of the game brainers has, at some point, we've been playing something where we're like, you know what, like, I don't know if I'm having fun with this game. Like, this feels more like work, or this is stressing me out,
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a factor that comes into play.
And by the way, we may have to put an asterisk on everything we reviewed in 2020 and say that when times are back to a slightly more normal state, maybe, and when our nerves are less frayed than they are currently, we might have a very different perception about what is fun and what isn't, right? We may be in a more fragile state than we sometimes realize or can acknowledge.
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
Which is interesting. The thing I'm taking away most from this discussion is what you said about turning an African video game industry into a board game, and just the idea that any process, right, any system can be gamified, and the struggles of what we try to do in real life is great fodder and great material for games. I think that's fantastic. And, when you talk about gamification in the educational space, I think that's really, really key, right? There's so many of the world's problems that we are trying to educate ourselves about would do well to be put into game form, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's something definitely where my career is headed in terms of like what I'm doing in business is basically combining my expertise and love of game design and education or training, right? And so I'm really starting to focus my company now on XR, if you will, or augmented reality, virtual reality training simulations.
Sure.
I had this kind of aha moment where I basically realized that doing these simulations in terms of business, like everybody needs to train people. And then, I mean, this has become even more important. Like, how do you do it safely and economically, like with what we're dealing with?
Sure.
And it's a great now that there's, a platform out there like the Oculus Quest, which is plug and play. It's relatively cheap. I mean, I think the Quest 2 is like I just saw for like $299. It's affordable.
Yeah.
It all of a sudden opens up the doors to, all types of like applications for training.
Amazing. Amazing. All right, here we go. These are going to be our top 5 games that blend mechanics and theme well. Let's start at our number 5, but first let's do honorable. Do you have any honorable mentions? I have a few.
I don't.
Here we go. Number 1 honorable mention, Jaws. We just talked about it in Games of the Brain, but man, it is a game that definitely I think Prospero Hall comes theme first, right? Because they come with a experience that they want to gamify. I think it does a great job. And then Francis Drake and the companion piece, Lignum, the heavier version of that, I think are both really great in the sense that they both have this phase in which you are making hard choices in terms of how much you are equipping yourself to go on this journey, to do this task. In one case, the task is raiding the Spanish Main as Francis Drake, and in another case, you are you're trying to chop down trees and get the timber to the sawmill and to work your way through the timber industry, and the way that both of those games have those two parts and the hard decisions in each of them just feels tremendously thematic. It makes me feel like I am doing what the game is designed to do at every stage, at every step of the way. And the decisions that I'm making, I could easily see in Francis Drake, a ship's captain making those tough decisions between do I go for this or do I go for that? I can't have, my ship can't be everything and I can't do everything. What am I going to focus on this journey into the Caribbean? So I love it, absolutely love it. What is your number 5?
My number. So actually, I do have an honorable mention. I just thought of it. I know we reviewed the game before. It's one of my favorites. New Amsterdam. Is incredibly thematic with the whole Native American moving them, down the river. Yeah,
heartbreaking, actually. Yeah.
And my list, just want to quantify a little bit. I focus, except for one game, Galleris, I focused mostly on games that came out last year. So this is kind of like a more, fresh 5 as opposed to all time list.
All right. Well, I'm doing all time, so that's gonna be a good. That's gonna be a good cross pollination there. Awesome. What's your number 5?
Yeah, number 5 is Bonfire. I would say the one of the new Stefan Fells that came out this year. This is a case where I feel like, and I've heard people, be kind of critical about it, but I feel like it's a very Feldian game. There's a lot of like interlocking mechanisms, a bit of point salad. Although I feel like there's certain things that you have to do to really be competitive in the game. But I think it has a very unique fantasy story that I feel like he crafted to help explain what's going on with the mechanics. But for me, it really makes sense. Like he basically created this world that fits with the mechanisms that he designed, and it works for me. I feel like it's a very good marriage, and it just makes a lot of sense.
Which is really interesting because when I think Stefan Feld, I think amazing design, theme could not be farther from his mind. And yet,
And I think, yeah.
yeah, no, go ahead. You're about to
No,
say.
I think that's usually the case,
Yeah.
right? And I think again, for whatever reason, I don't know if he did it himself or if he had help, but this very intricate story about these guardians and lighting these bonfires and bringing light back to the world, and it's just like it's like a very kind of deep fantasy story that he created, but I feel like it really goes together and makes a lot of sense in the game.
It's pretty great. I love it. My number 5 is Panamax. And whenever I say the word Panamax, I think of Paul doing the moment anyone that says Panamax, say, Panamax! Panamax! Which
I refer to this game as Panamax.
It's tough. It's hard. But guess what? It is tremendously thematic. If you were a shipping company and you had to deal with ships moving through the Panama Canal, which is 60-70% of all shipments in the world, at some point traverse the Panama Canal, something along those lines, or at least shipping. It's amazing, and the game really does a great job of creating the issues and the complex problems of getting your ship in position and moving it along and dealing with traffic jams and all that sort of stuff. And I think it really feels like I am managing a shipping company that is trying to traverse the Panama Canal and bring the biggest profits to my company that I can. Much like I was saying about, I like to see different themes. This is a very different theme. This is a theme that is loving. Could it be more thematic? I'm sure that it could be. I'm sure that they could get into the weeds in terms of how these things really work. And at some point, it is abstracted. It is, okay, my ship is pushing your ship along and all that sort of stuff, and that'll make sense. But Panamax is a very interesting theme, and the mechanics work very, very well within it. Your number 4, Elder.
My number 4 is a little game called Perseverance. This is basically kind of like a version of Jurassic Park, I guess, in a way. You crash land. It's a very intricate story.
This is the Castaway Chronicles.
What's that?
Castaway Chronicles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Exactly. Where you crash land on an island that's inhabited by these dinosaurs. Maybe there's a time travel thing. I can't quite remember, but somehow you're it's like Jurassic Park meets Lost.
Ooh.
I think is the concept.
Ooh.
Right? Which would it seems like it could make a pretty cool movie, right?
Kind of the Land That Time Forgot.
Yeah, or a Netflix show or something like that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah, probably would be better episodic, which actually the board game has several episodes, right? Like there's like a whole another board after you've established, your colony or whatever on this island, right?
Right.
But basically you play a person who is a leader and you have these helpers or workers, but it's semi-collaborative. Excuse me, in that there's these dinosaurs that are attacking you, and you have to basically, like Lost, you have to basically take scraps from your crashed, vessel that got you there, and create this, camp. And at the same time, you have to defend against the encroaching dinosaurs that are coming. And yeah, just very, very thematic. Again, I feel like they probably did come up with this story concept first and then, came up with mechanics that would match it. But with the minis and the worker placement and, the kind of intrigue that's inherent in the game and the decisions that you have to make, it feels like this is a very good marriage of mechanics and story or theme.
Interesting. I purposely left story style games out of the mix. So it's interesting that you put one in there because by that definition, the Gloomhavens of the world and the Kingdom Death Monster and all those, those blend mechanics and theme very well, but they're kind of almost a side issue, right? They're kind of almost a different type of game. But that's interesting. Perseverance, I haven't played it yet, so I'm dying to check it out.
Yeah, it's really good. It's funny because I only played it a few times and I had a great time, and for some reason just have not been able to get it back on the table.
I think we know the reason.
Yeah.
My number 4 is very similar to your number 1. Your number 1 is Gallerist. My number 4 is Modern Art. The Reiner Knizia bidding game could not be simpler. We are gallery owners, and we get our hands on paintings by certain artists. There are 5 artists in total, and we are putting them up for auction. And there are 4 different ways the auctions can go, and at the end of the game, whoever earns the most money wins. And when, at the end of each of the 3 rounds, whenever one work of art sells the most, that work of art becomes inherently more valuable in future rounds, which is just, it's such a simple game. It is such an elegant little design by Reiner Knizia. And yet, when you're playing it, I completely feel like I'm a wheeler dealer in the art world. That is my number 4. What is your number 3, Elder?
My number 3 is the new Dune game, Dune Imperium, which is based on the reboot movie that's going to be coming out. Although they used the art assets from the game, so again, very story driven, and this has been a super hot game on Tabletop Simulator, on the server that I'm on, TTS Club. I mean, you put up Dune Imperium, and you'll have players in moments. Like, you'll never be waiting around to get a game of this off. And I kind of don't really understand it. I think it's an interesting game. Again, for me, I'm not a big conflict guy. It has some resources, but it doesn't have, like 13, 14. So I guess those are 2 for me. But one thing I do really appreciate about the game is just how thematic it is. I mean, it just really, really feels like, it's all about duking it out on the planet surface, this like nonstop war of these factions. All of the houses, have some mechanism that make them recognizable in the lore or the IP, and how difficult it is to get water and how important spice is. I mean, I just think, pound for pound, hitting all of the things that are important about the theme, the mechanisms really, get that across.
Awesome.
Yeah.
My number 3 is Pandemic. Any version of Pandemic, Pandemic Legacy even more so, but Pandemic is one of these games that once you play it the very first time, you immediately understand it. These cubes are the disease, and the disease is getting worse. The epidemic is growing, and once you get enough cubes in a city, if you get another cube, it expands to all of the cities that it touches. Everywhere that there's a train or plane or whatever connecting, it is going to spread to those cities. And the efforts to eradicate it are so clear, so evident. It's as though maybe it should be higher on this particular list, because the way you play the game is so connected to the theme.
Yeah.
Really amazing. And maybe why it is so incredibly popular. Maybe it really exploded out there because it's interesting to, and by the way, very interesting theme, very different theme than everything else. You are virus hunters that are trying to stop an epidemic in its tracks, and boy, oh boy, can we relate to that right now. But it is a great theme, and the mechanics 100% mirror that.
Yeah,
absolutely. What is your number 2?
Well, it was the game that we reviewed today, which we've already talked a lot about, Darwin's Journey. Again, great marriage of mechanics and theme.
Totally agree. I think it is very thematic. I said it in the review. It plays very much like you are on the Beagle, or you're on another sister ship to the Beagle and exploring. My number 2 is my number 2 game of all time, and my number 1, I'll tell you, is my number 1 game of all time. My number 2 is Twilight Struggle. When I am playing Twilight Struggle, I feel as though I am Henry Kissinger or whoever you want to say you are. I am working to foil the Soviet threat, or I am working to drown the capitalist pigs in their own blood. I am trying to. My hand of cards are things that are about to happen, things that could happen, and if they're my events, I can choose whether or not to force them upon the world or to hold off. And if they're enemy events, I am responding to them. I'm playing them at a certain time in order to respond to them and to act against them. And it could not feel more like I am right here in the events of our time, and I have just a limited amount of ability to control and shape them to my will. Absolutely love Twilight Struggle. Twilight Imperium, not Twilight Struggle, what's the other one? Imperial Struggle is one of those games that definitely could be on this list. I just haven't played it quite enough to say for sure. But anyway, that's my number 2. What is your number 1, as if I have to guess?
Exactly. And, number 1 game of all time, Gallerist. Just love how, excuse me, this game plays and how you really do have the experience of being this international art dealer. It's very important that you're discovering these new artists, this idea that when you discover them, you make this kind of deal with them that they will make a piece for you or create a piece of art, and you'll be able to get it at that initial price, but you can only make that deal with one artist at a time. That your one of your major resources in the game is your influence, which is expressed in like how much money you have or have access to, because you can spend your influence for money, versus your kind of like popularity. So your kind of network or your connections with these celebrities, which you can, invite, give free tickets to come into your gallery, and they will, attract others or give you more influence. That there's this kind of international market where you have to kind of place these bids for. All these things, kind of swirling around together in this. Just very interesting, anchor of mechanics that just really give you this great feeling and winds up making a great game. And again, like this goes to your point of like being very unique. Modern art is very specific, and it's just about that kind of bidding mechanic. Yep. But this game, just Galleris, takes it to a whole other level where, you have all these other things. You're promoting your artist. You actually have a gallery. You can sell pieces, but you have to have a contract. It's just like, it just kind of hits all of those things. And who knows if like, it actually feels anything like this if you actually have that job of being an international art dealer. But it sure of hell seems like it, as an abstraction. Like it just seems like it just really nails it.
And I don't think it matters if it's really what it feels like. What matters is that it feels like it's what it feels like.
Exactly.
I think, thinking about it, Vital Lacerda is one of those designers that does seem to design theme first. Certainly CO2 came theme first. I think Vinos came theme first. I think a lot of his designs come from that point of view. I think Lisboa as well. So I think he's one of those designers that is very, very concentrated on theme and then designing mechanisms to fit that theme.
Yeah. Yep. On Mars as well. Even the Getaway game. I can't remember the name of it right now, but yeah,
it's amazing.
Yep.
My number 1 is my number 1 game of all time, just like yours. Die Macher is we could say it. It's the greatest game that has ever been made or ever will be made. Other people they don't want to feel like they're just glomming on to mine, so they come up with their own choice. But we all know that it's in parentheses, and next to it is debugger for
Right.
everyone's number one game.
Yeah.
It is so amazing how the game takes 4 hours plus to play. It just does. I mean, maybe people can play it faster, but I don't think it should play faster than that, because it involves negotiation and argument and all this sort of stuff. You're in a political campaign. We play a variant. It's not a variant. It's just a re-theme, which is set in the American presidential primary system, where it is multiple candidates vying to be the candidate that their party is going to put up against the current president in the next presidential election. And it works wonderfully in that sense. It works 100% perfectly. But there are so many. It's an older game. It's from the 1980s, and it has so many. It's got that old design where there are 12 phases to each round, right? There are 7 rounds, and this phase is this, and this phase is that. But because the theme is so tied to everything, it's seamless. And everybody, whoever played it with, has said, I can't believe that it is 1 a.m. I feel like it should be only 10 at night. It just goes so quickly. The idea of these states that have their own issues and their concerns, and you're trying to change the public opinion in those places to come closer to your own party platform, or you're changing your own platform. The way that you have limited resources, you have these basically these important people in your party that can go and campaign for you, but you can only use them once. And where are you gonna put them? Where are you gonna have them make their big splash? And what are they gonna do? How are they gonna change public opinion? How are they gonna change the number of votes that you're getting? Absolutely fascinating. And in terms of theme, one of the most different themes out there. There's very, very few political games that are out there. Maybe because the best has already been done. That's it. That's our top 5 blending of mechanics and theme. And didn't even mean to do it, but we did the recent blending of themes, and we did the classic blending of themes and mechanics.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.